Well, hello everyone. My name is Baha. Hilo. I was born and raised in the town of Bethlehem some 40 years ago in Palestine. I have a degree in sociology, and for the past 16 plus years, I've been focused on education on Palestine through primarily tourism and through engaging like internationals from around the world with Palestine during different um, events on our, let's say, cultural calendar in Palestine. We invite a lot of people to help out during like the olive harvest or for the olive planting, during Christmas in Palestine, and so on and so forth. We try to help people understand the so-called complicated reality that is imposed upon us in Palestine by the State of Israel. I'm very thankful for you guys for hosting me. Like, this is probably the first time I hear about the Malaysian Women Coalition for Quds and Palestine, and I hope it will be like a beginning of like many different activities and events in the future. So let's go into the subject. The subject for today was to highlight the Israeli impact on the Palestinian olive sector. And just to explain a little bit about the olive trees in Palestine and so on and so forth. So this will be kind of like the theme of the lecture, and I hope it helps you like understand. It will help you eventually to understand like what's going on in Palestine in terms of like everything that happens above the land, whether it's for towards like criminal behavior towards Palestinians or towards any Palestinian element we find in Palestine. In the very beginning, like the one thing I try to remind people in the beginning of every conversation I have is that many people do not understand that Israel and Palestine are two different references to the exact same geography. The geography in Palestine, as you see on here, it's a pretty small geography, around 27,009 square kilometers altogether. So it's not that big of a space. Palestinians refer to Palestine with the term Palestine. Jewish nationalists and Zionists and those who run the state of Israel in Palestine and their allies and supporters and beneficiaries and defenders would refer to Palestine with the term the state of Israel. This is the map of Palestine. In fact, like I got this map off the website of the Israeli Ministry of Agriculture to talk about, agriculture in Israel. And if you see, like, if you show this map to a Palestinian, they will tell you this is about Palestine. If you show this same map to anyone who's related to the state of Israel in a way, they would call it the state of Israel. So we're talking about two different names referring to the same geography. The part of this geography that will be focused on today is the kind of parts in gray, the occupied West Bank of River Jordan and the Gaza Strip. So these are the two regions in Palestine that I'll be focused on. As many of the viewers understand, is that the State of Israel completed its control over Palestine in 1967 by subjecting the territory of the West Bank and the territory of Gaza to an ongoing military occupation where Palestine is still ruled based on Israeli military methods. I'll be focused on the destruction of the olive sector in these two regions. But the same destruction that's carried out in these two regions is also carried out throughout the rest of Palestine. So when it comes to olive trees, we are talking about the only living element that have been alive in Palestine over the past 5,000 years. Olive trees cover nearly 40% of the Palestinian urban land. It's almost everywhere. In the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip, we have inherited nearly 7 million olive trees from all the past civilizations that lived here. So olive trees are not wild trees. They require human care in order to continue providing and to continue growing. So the existence of every single olive tree on the land of Palestine is another evidence that this land have been populated continuously for at least 5,000 years. Just by the mere existence of olive trees, we debunk the Zionist myth that Palestine was a land without people, for people without land. Palestine has never been a land without people, and we have nearly 7 million evidences to debunk this racist claim. As a permanent element of the landscape in Palestine, olive trees also found their way into almost every aspect of our lives, not only the physical and commercial aspect that has to do with the livelihood, but also in terms of religions and cultures. So all existing religions in Palestine have viewed olive trees to be sacred trees. The very first religion that we have of the Abrahamic religions that we have in Palestine is Jewish faith, and olive trees are sacred in Jewish faith, the same way in Christianity, the same way in Islamic faith as well. So anybody who upholds any of those three Abrahamic faiths understand that olive trees have sacred values. Also in our kind of modern culture, like olive trees have been part of a lot of cultural and folk songs, and as well as poetry and so on. I just want to bring your attention to one very little thing that we say or we refer to, like many Palestinians that speak about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine or refer to the removal of the Palestinian society from their places of origin. They would say we were uprooted from our homeland. And that's one thing that is done to olive trees. So when you uproot an olive tree that is connected to the homeland in the exact same way you remove a Palestinian family from its land in the form of uprooting. So olive trees are very, very present in our religions and in our cultures, and they have such a great value to Palestinians and to anybody that identifies with olive trees in general. Also, it's important to refer to the, let's say, materialistic value of olive trees. Olive trees contribute to nearly 60% of the productive economy of the Palestinian society. This, for example, is one of the most ancient olive trees I know. It's about 30 minutes drive away from where I live in Bethlehem, and it's about 4,500 years. So you can imagine the contribution such element have been providing to the livelihoods of all the families that ate off this one single tree. Every olive tree produces up to 9 kilograms of olives annually, about 2 liters of olive oil. Olive trees have, been large part and very important part of our cuisine, whether as pickled olives or olive oil. Also, it contributes to the production of an ancient craft that we have in Palestine. About 1,000 years ago, people discovered that they could turn olive oil into some form of soap. The very first soap, I think, known to humanity has been produced in the town of Nablus in Palestine. It has been an ongoing production for nearly 1,000 years. I will show you a picture from the 20s and a picture from about 5 years ago to tell you this kind of olive oil soap production that has been continually going on in Palestine. Also, we have an ancient a craft where because olive wood is also lives forever in a way. So many people turn olive wood into crafts that are sold usually to like visitors of Palestine and pilgrims and people who want to have, let's say, a piece of the whole land with them once they go back home. And it's a multi-million dollars, like uh, let's say a multi-million dollars kind of industry that supports a lot of families that live around and south of and in the city of Jerusalem. So like it's a very like it's a tree that exists in our life, in our life and our livelihoods, and it not only, let's say, just a thing that we eat off or abuse or use. Many people like wish those olive trees could speak, because in our culture, as you know, like trees in general are viewed as living things. So we don't talk about objects. We talk about living elements that we wish could speak, so they will tell us at least some of the wisdoms of the stories of survival in Palestine over at least the past 5,000 years. Unfortunately, like the fascination and the beauty of the olive trees is not the reason for this lecture. This lecture is to shed a light on the destructive impact of the state of Israel on the olive sector. Since the year 2001, at least like 1 million olive trees have been destroyed by Israeli authorities and by Israelis. All those olive trees exist on private property, so every olive tree that have been destroyed is an olive tree that was inherited by the family that is looking after them. So we are talking about a hidden dimension of destruction of life and livelihood for Palestinian families. Those like nearly 1 million olive trees have been destroyed by the state of Israel through different policies. One of the main policies that the state of Israel uses to destroy olive trees is a policy that they call price tag. So price tag is a policy carried out by Jewish Israelis that live in the occupied West Bank. We lose an average of like 10,000 olive trees because of Israeli settler violence. We have nearly 750,000 Jewish Israelis living in the occupied West Bank, many of which are violent and all of which believe that they have superior status to that of the Palestinians, and they do whatever they want. Like, of course, like the most famous stories are stories about murder of Palestinians, but also like destruction of the evidence of Palestinian existence on the land, which is olive trees is going on, and we lose about 10,000 olive trees on average because of Israeli settler violence. Mind you that the state of Israel claims to be a state of laws. So many families that end up losing their olive trees because of Israeli settler violence would appeal to the Israeli authorities for investigation and figuring out like who did this or who did that. The Israelis would allow Palestinians to submit complaints and requests for investigation and so on. But for example, one Israeli human rights organization issued a report stating that out of 100% of all the complaints that are submitted by Palestinians, 93% are ignored, 7% of the complaints about destruction of olives have been investigated or followed up, and 0 is the number of Israelis that were arrested for destroying olive trees. So the first kind of policy that results in the destruction of olive trees is Israeli settler violence, which is a policy that Israelis refer to with the term price tag. The second way of destruction of olive trees that the state of Israel uses is in order to install a 730 kilometers long wall. That Israeli wall is the concrete is not as destructive because the famous concrete wall, the gray one, is only like 10 to 15 meters wide. So the land it destroys is smaller than the land that the rest of the wall destroys. 90% of the Israeli wall is made of series of barbed wires and dirt roads and military roads and so on. It's up to 40 to 60 meters wide and paves everything that's on its way. So we have lost thousands and thousands of olive trees as the state of Israel installs this wall. 100% of the Israeli wall is installed on private property owned by different Palestinian families. And those families like sought their land being destroyed before their eyes, and everything, including olive trees on that land, has been removed. The next way is through the construction of Israeli settlements. The state of Israel have established more than 193 different Jewish-only settlements on the land of the West Bank. Many of those settlements were established after the state of Israel destroyed everything in the landscape, like trees being one of the main things that we have on those lands. And the state of Israel comes in, clears everything, removes every evidence of Palestinian existence, remove every single Palestinian that exists on this hill or that hill, and then replaces it with concrete homes for Jewish Israelis to live permanently in the occupied West Bank. So the first thing is Israeli settler violence. The second thing is the wall. The third thing is the Israeli construction of colonies. The fourth way is that the state of Israel connects its colonies throughout the West Bank. The areas marked in triangles or in blue with a road network. That road network is about 1,200 kilometers long and paves through the landscape of Palestine, doing exactly like what the wall is doing, which is like destroying olive trees on the way. It's very easy for anyone to know what used to be there before the Israelis came in and installed this road. Look on both sides of the road, you'll see olive trees. And then that is an evidence that you are driving on what used to be land planted and covered with olive trees. It's important to mention that nearly 1/3 of those settler roads that were paved by Israeli governments throughout the occupied West Bank that are inaccessible by Palestinian residents of the West Bank, including the families that own the land on which the road is installed. So when we say like Israeli roads where Palestinians are banned access to, we're talking about situations where the state of Israel would come to your land, destroy it, install a road on it, and prevent you from stepping a foot or driving on those roads. And of course, like the last way of that commonly used and results on the destruction of the olive sector in Palestine is through military operations. The state of Israel, like when they would invade and send in their military carriers, bulldozers, tanks, and so on, they would pave also everything on their way, including olive trees. There were like military operations that were carried out through the Gaza Strip, for example, that resulted in the destruction of hundreds of thousands of olive trees. In Gaza alone, we have more than 350,000 olive trees that were destroyed by Israeli military operations. So in every one of those situations, the state of Israel would take advantage of the fact that everyone is focused on the Israeli criminal behavior that results on the destruction of life, murder of people, blown up homes, destruction of houses, restrictions of movement, denial of water resources, and so on and so forth. And somehow they get away with destruction of olive trees because, they think that, or people think usually that it's okay to compare human life with environmental reality or with the environmental issues. which in fact, like everything on Israel's way, as long as this thing is a Palestinian, you know, it's disposable and it can be destroyed and removed whenever the Israelis see fit. So on, like, the destruction of olive trees is going hand in hand with the destruction of the Palestinian society that had been carried out by the founders of the State of Israel about 73 years ago and continues up until today. And the same way the State of Israel faces no consequences for the elimination of the Palestinian society, they face no consequences whatsoever when it comes to the destruction of the olive sector. What do we do in the face of this destruction? Actually, we don't have much in our hands. For example, one of the high seasons of Israeli violence towards Palestinians is around the olive harvest time. So the olive harvest happens around October every year, third week of October, and goes on for nearly 1 month. Many of the fields where olive trees are planted like are surrounded by either Israeli settler roads or Israeli infrastructure or settlements and so on and so forth, which makes it kind of like unsafe for many Palestinian families to harvest them safely, you know, because of the presence of Israeli soldiers, Israeli settlers, and so on and so forth. So what we do is, like, we invite internationals in October to come and help out with the olive harvest, not only because of the support and with labor, because that's obviously like not, we don't lack labor when it comes to the olive harvest. Like it's a very beautiful season. All the family like comes out in a celebratory kind of way, like enjoying the generosity of such trees. But the important thing is that internationals that come to Palestine, they they come in with a visa from the State of Israel. So they are subject to the Israeli civil law, while the Palestinians themselves are subject to Israeli military law. The Israelis can, just arrest you for being on your land, harass you, provoke you, and then declare your land to be a closed military zone where you are not allowed to be present in it. But then when we bring in internationals who would witness the absurdity of this kind of behavior, the Israeli law will be applicable on the Palestinians. The Israeli military law will be applicable on the Palestinians, but not applicable on foreigners and visitors. So you have this kind of situation where two confusing laws end up clashing, and in this way, an international ends up intentionally or unintentionally providing Palestinians with more safety to be present on their land during the harvest. So in a way, providing protective presence for Palestinian families as they are doing the olive harvest. The second thing that we do is that we invite people to help out with the planting, also to bear witness for what's happening, and also to help us, plant trees. We don't plant olive trees because we could replace them. Like nobody can replace a 1,000 or 2,000 years olive tree. No one can do that. It can be replaced in 1,000 or 2,000 years. But what we do is that we have to face destruction in a way that includes everything except of submission. So we plant, the Israelis destroy, and then we plant again, the Israelis destroy it, we plant again, and then it's left. So it's kind of like how patient you are in how patient you are in facing the Israeli machine of destruction. I, for one, have been involved in the planting of olive trees almost every year since the year 2006. Of course, many of the trees that we planted were destroyed, but then those that were destroyed will be planted again and again and again until they are until the Israelis get tired of the destruction, It's a very interesting way in living up to like cliches. Like, for example, if you fight, you might lose. If you don't, you've already lost. So we know the Israeli destructive behavior, and we know that there's a big risk in Israeli destruction, but we cannot afford submitting to that destruction. So we keep doing as little as we can until something big happens and the governments around the world start realizing that the Israeli regime is a rogue regime, the Israeli ideology that runs the state is a racist ideology, and sanctions have to happen. So what we're doing is like we're supporting one another in steadfastness and in surviving Israeli oppression until this oppression ends up in the exact same way that all other forms of oppression that exist in Palestine in the past 5,000 years ended. Like oppression is not sustainable anywhere else in the world, and it's definitely not sustainable in Palestine. Believe it or not, over the past 5,000 years, we had 23 different civilizations that ruled over Palestine. They left stone behind and many bad stories. And the state of Israel's behavior is not going to be any different from all the oppressors that came over Palestine and failed in destroying this place. I want to stop here, and I hope you guys have questions about things I did not get to mention in the talk. So thank you so very much for listening.
All right, thank you, Baha, so much for literally bringing the olive tree to life. Now, I was looking at those photos, right, of all the trees and the people and the destruction, and it occurred to me it must be quite emotional to lose trees that are living and breathing testimony to your historical right. Can you perhaps talk a little bit about the emotional impact of the destruction of olive trees on the Palestinians?
I mentioned in the beginning that Palestinians refer to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the destruction of Palestinian and the expulsion of Palestinian families from their homeland with the term uprooting. In a way, it feels like when you uproot an olive tree, it feels like you are uprooting a family, you know? You are uprooting people, you are removing the one thing that you inherited in the past years. I've met a lot of Palestinians that witnessed the destruction of their olive trees. And I can tell you that the descriptions are very graphic. Like, how did you feel? Like one of the farmers that I work closely with had many of his olive trees destroyed in the beginning of this year, like 1st of January 2021. An Israeli military unit came to his land and started cutting down olive trees. And I was like, how did it feel when you saw them like with their chainsaws? And it's like, it felt like they were taking like my heart from within my lung. Other farmers would say like, it's like decapitating my arms, you know? And I'm sure like those people are still alive, but the unbearable pain of witnessing something that, you know, as harmless as a tree that have been given you and your family generously for years and years. And the olive tree itself, like if it was more than 300 or 400 years old, it preserves part of the family history, you know? Like in every olive season, you have 3 generations on the land, and everyone is talking about like the story of this generation and the story of that generation, what happened when I was your age, and so on and so forth. So in a way, like it's an element that preserves the family history. And to have this element being just chopped away simply because it's the evidence of Palestinian existence, it is not like it's not easy for people to actually explain it. It's very important to mention that the one description of a graphic description of destruction of olive trees I found was in the Old Testament, you know, in the Torah.
Mm.
It says like cutting off trees, the branches of trees is like cutting people's arms. But of course, the farmer that was telling me it was like cutting my arms, of course, he has no idea about the Torah, you know? Like he has no idea about like how this, like how looking after olive trees started with, you know, the Abrahamic faiths that ended up in Palestine. But you have this very contradictory and confusing situation where a Palestinian person who identifies with a Muslim or Christian faith is describing the destruction of his life and the destruction of his olive trees in the exact same way it was described for Jewish people 5,000 years ago.
Mm.
You know, so it's very confusing. Like emotionally, it's like the feeling of loss, the feeling of devastation, but it goes beyond like losing one thing in your lifetime, because you are losing something that has been productive, useful, feeding the family for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Mm.
When people look at the destruction of olive trees, they just think it's like, you know, we're losing wild trees the same way we're losing rainforests. But this is not a wild tree. This is something that have contributed to the well-being and survival of your family, which contributed to your existence to begin with,
Mm.
you know?
Mm.
So it's a loss beyond imagination. Just also think about it economically. Like, you know, every olive tree on average produces like, on average, like whether it's an olive tree that was planted last year or an olive tree that was planted 5,000 years ago, on average, every olive tree produces up to 9 kilograms of olives. We are talking about, in terms of US dollars, uh, we are talking about like nearly 50 US dollars per tree, you know, and that loss is an annual loss. That's not like something you lost and stopped. No, it's like an annual loss that you lose year in, year out, you know? So it's very difficult to actually even give a financial value to the loss of an olive tree, let alone about the sentimental value and like the emotional value of this tree that is just chopped off simply because it's an obstacle for in the face of the Israeli machine of destruction.
Have you stopped sharing your screen?
Yeah.
My screen is shared, no?
Yeah. Do you still want to share your screen, or should we stop sharing the screen now?
You are screen sharing. I'm sharing the screen. You can't see it?
Yeah.
Baha, I'm Dr. Fauzia. Thank you so much for the very enlightening talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Tell me.
Yes, I just like to know, maybe I'm not having the privy to understand the true picture. When the Israeli destroy the olive trees, I was just wondering, since this is the heart of their economic production for the family, what actually the family do, you know? Do they replant, or do they do another job, or what do they
Okay.
do?
So your question is about what is done with the what do we do after destruction? It's wrong to, even though like olive trees contribute a large part to the well-being of families and their livelihoods and so on. We don't have olive farmers, you know. Everyone is doing a job, and the olive tree, because it requires less care, just pruning once every 2 years, watering once in the summer, and harvesting annually. Like it doesn't need somebody to be 100% focused on olive farming. So with the time that people have in their hands outside those 3 or 4 weeks a year, you know, they already have their own jobs. Like for example, there is a family of 11 people that I work with, and that family, like only one per person, the grandparent, like goes jumping from one tree to the other because he has so much time in his hands. So we don't have people who are 100% dependent on olive trees because, like, you know, it takes 2 weeks out of the whole year to look after it, just plowing the land around it and so on. So what happens when the tree is destroyed? The families will try to replant those trees that were destroyed in different places. Like the Israelis will come and uproot the trees, and you'll have families that will try to rescue those olive trees. And unfortunately, that doesn't work because, like, it has like 5 to 10% chance for the tree to survive. In terms of destruction, because of roads or because of the wall or because of the settlements, the land is completely stolen. So, like, you will have no access to the land to begin with. Like, people survive. Like, in any situation of oppression, the main thing that people do collectively, I mean, between a Palestinian who's a year old and a Palestinian who's 100 years old and everyone in between, the one thing in common between all of us is surviving Israeli destruction as it happens. Palestinians refuse, like many people, refuse to submit, you know? We know that the Israelis do what they have to. Like, every Israeli soldier is paid to destroy, you know? So they do what they are paid to do. They do what they have to. But at the same time, like, we don't have to be submissive to this destruction. So many people, like, figure out ways to plant different plots of land, or if that plot of land is accessible, they will replant it with olive trees, hoping that their children or grandchildren will be able to get olives. Also, I forgot to mention that olive trees are very slow in growing. Like, you plant an olive tree today, it might start producing the average in 10 years from today, you know? It's a very slow growing tree. You don't plant an olive tree to eat of it, you know? There is a Greek proverb that we use, is that it says that a society grows strong when old men plant trees under whose shade they will never sit, you know? So even the planting of an olive tree is an act of selflessness, you know? You don't do it for yourself. You do it for people you might not even meet, in the exact same way. Like, the person who planted this tree in the picture does not know or did not know that there will be a family eating of it 5,000 years down the road. It's an act of selflessness that people do for the generations to come, you know? And one painful thing is that you are a person who received the blessings, you know, of an olive tree. You received it, but then that olive tree is destroyed in your lifetime. So you'll not be able to pass anything for the future generation, you know? So what do? People survive in general, you know? And I'm not saying that we all survive in the exact same way, you know? Any situation of oppression does not mean that the oppressed will all have to survive in the exact same way. And we have Palestinians who survive through fighting. We have Palestinians who survive through submission. We have Palestinians who survive in different ways, you know? So when the state of Israel brings destruction upon your olive trees, you have to survive it in a way or another. We have many examples of families that had their olive trees destroyed 3 or 4 times, you know, which means that they planted it 4 or 5 times, you know. So like, what do people do? They try to do everything except for submission to the destruction.
Thank you so much once again, right? You've successfully brought this ancient tree to life. Perhaps we'll take one more question. Anybody? One more question?
If nobody, I would like to ask another question.
Please, Dr. Fauzia.
Yeah, can you enlighten us about the water supply to these farms?
Okay. So it's actually a very interesting question, Doctor, because, you know, olive trees do not need anything beyond rainwater, you know? And of course, it rains 22 times a year, and like it survives in, like if you witness August in Palestine, it's like one of the hottest months. It's very dry, you know? So olive trees survive in this environment in a way that makes it the most ideal tree for the climate in Palestine. So how much water does it receive? Rainwater, like just what God provides in the winter of this or that year. So it's not irrigated, you know. To produce 5,000, to produce 1 ton of olives in Palestine, you need 0 water. Now, when you look into the Israeli production of olives, they talk about wasting nearly 5,000 cubic meters of water to produce the exact same amount of olives, 1 ton. Now, all the water in Palestine is managed by the Israelis. The Israeli water company makes sure that Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza do not receive anything more than 17% of the available water resources. What does this mean? It means about 60 liters of water per person per day. That's about 45 liters lower than what the World Health Organization recommends for average survival. It means that we also do not have running water for our homes, you know? So we don't have regular access to, like, continuous access to the water. We get water on an average of nearly 10 hours of running water a week. If you visit Palestinian communities in Palestine, you see their rooftops covered with water containers. So those water containers are part of our infrastructure because, like, when the water comes from the main supply, for those 10 hours a week, you have to store some of it in order to use it domestically later on. So when we have shortage of water for drinking and for domestic use, we do not have, you know, enough water for our agriculture. So we depend on planting stuff that does not need, you know, too much irrigation and too much water, because once again, we barely have enough water to drink. The average consumption for a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank, as I said, about 60 liters per person per day. The average consumption of water for the Jewish Israeli settler in the occupied West Bank exceeds 350 liters per person per day, you know? And it's the exact same water managed by the exact same water company. There is a funny thing that the head of the Israeli Water Authority once said, that Palestinians have problem with water because they have a primitive water network. But guess what? Our primitive water network works every time there is water in it. The issue is not about how primitive or, you know, advanced our water network is. The man whose hand is on the water tap opens it for some, closes it for some. You know? I hope that answers your question, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
All right, Baha, thank you so much, right, for taking the time, obliging us, and despite the earlier technical glitches, alhamdulillah, it's turned out to be a very informative and enlightening session with you. Are there any last words, parting words that you would like to add before we close the session?
Well, I want to thank you all for joining this. I hope it opens up your eyes to another dimension of Israeli destruction of Palestinian society that unfortunately will keep going on and on and on as long as the state of Israel has any kind of diplomatic, economic, and military connection with any country around the world. The way to help Palestinians rid themselves from this oppression is simply by holding the criminal responsible. Also, I'm very, very, very thankful for this opportunity because, as I said in the very beginning, there is so much confusion about the reality that is imposed upon Palestinians by the state of Israel. And it feels like the more information you share with people, the more they get confused. You know, in the end of the day, it's a very simple reality. It's not complicated. People's lives are being destroyed and controlled and dominated simply because they were born to Palestinian families. People are treated or given a pass or enjoying a superior status. It has nothing to do with their behavior, but has to do with the fact that they were born to Jewish families. We are ruled by the state of Israel that creates this kind of like racist reality and mistreats people simply because of their birth, you know? Like, I'm a Palestinian who's nearly 40 years old and did not get a chance to live a day of freedom, you know? Just like 20 minutes away, the state of Israel built a home that sold it to a Jewish family, and that Jewish family are treated or given a superior status simply because they were born, not because of anything that they did. Those things have to be understood so people understand like the true nature of the state of Israel, you know? And people say, oh, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And it's like, well, if it was a democracy, then why the hell would they have a problem with that? You know, the problem is exactly because it's not. It's an apartheid regime, and that apartheid regime has to end up in the exact same way that apartheid regime in South Africa, the Jim Crow laws, and other forms of fascism ended in the world. And as long as it's there, as long as people have or governments have diplomatic, economic, and military connection with this regime will continue to destroy the lives of Palestinians until we disappear, you know? And by the way, like they succeeded to eliminate nearly 66% of us. You know, 66% of the Palestinian people are not allowed to live at home. It's not going to take them another 73 years to finish the job. So we hope they fail in finishing the job, and we hope that people who believe in freedom, justice, and people who believe that everyone is born free and equal will continue to spread the word and continue to help in exposing the true nature of the state of Israel as we Palestinians experience it, not as the wishful thinking that I've been hearing in the media around the world. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and please, 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 if you guys feel like you will need, you or any of the viewers will feel that there is something I can provide you in terms of reports, information, readings, and just to get educated more on what's happening in Palestine, please do not hesitate. Like you can reach out to us through our website, which is www.2b-there.com. So thank you so very much, Asra, and thank you, Doctor, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Baha. You were described to me as an encyclopedia in Palestine, and I'm quite certain we will call on you, inshallah, in the future. Thank you so much for the very, very enlightening educational session. Thank you.
Thank you, dear. Take one.